The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
With a combination of rural and suburban outposts, Franklin County has a unique place within the St. Louis metro area. And Franklin County Presiding Commissioner John Griesheimer says his longtime home possesses its share of opportunities and challenges. The Republican official joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking, so let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast, the only podcast about Missouri politics that believes in hard work, that believes in values, and whose platform will surface in due time. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
colleague Joe Mannies.
And joining us for the first time ever, somebody that both Joe and I know very well.
And we're really pumped about this.
Our special guest today is
John Griesheimer, Presiding Commissioner of Franklin County. Hey, it's good to be back with you guys again.
This is going to be a very nostalgic podcast for both Joe and I, because I've known Presiding Commissioner Griesheimer when he was Senator Griesheimer. I'm sure you knew him when he was Representative Griesheimer.
Yes.
You have a very long, distinguished career in public service, going back to the early 80s?
Actually, 1982, yeah.
1982.
That's where I started.
Before we ask about kind of your background and your career, just kind of explain what the Presiding Commissioner of Franklin County does.
Well, in St. Louis County and St. Charles County and Jefferson County, you've got a county council and a county executive. Well, we are the legislative body of Franklin County, but there are three commissioners. The presiding commissioners elected by all of the county residents, and then you have the two district commissioners, which one's elected by the northern half, the other's elected by the southern half of the county. So there's a three commission panel that we are the legislative body of Franklin County.
So now Jefferson County used to have that until a few years ago when it changed.
Yes.
Does Franklin County, which is pretty fast growing, does it have any plans to change its form of government so that it would have the council county executive form, or do you think this works well, what you have now?
Well, at some point we're going to grow to the point where we're going to need a county council. But actually, we had an election, I'm going to say about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. No, excuse me. It was longer than that.
I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah, it was. You're right.
Times
it was before I
when
came
you're
on.
having fun.
And when you get old, you know. But yeah, it was before I came on in 2010, and it was to form a county, a county executive, charter county, and it went down in flames. And there were rumors on both sides, both the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, nobody liked it, and as I remember, I think I got maybe 40% of the vote. But
yeah, not nearly enough.
Not very enough. So I don't see it happening on the radar screen for quite a while.
Now, explain a little bit to our listeners, like where's the county seat in Franklin County, and then sort of like some of the main industries and the growth in Franklin County.
The county seat is actually kind of centrally located in Franklin County in Union, Missouri, off of Highway 50. And we've got I'm going to say at the last census we were 101,000. We're probably 103. We're not really growing as well as we should, okay, compared to Jefferson County or St. Charles County. But we're kind of on the western fringe of the metropolitan area, so it's a longer drive for people to go to work in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Obviously our largest industry in Franklin County is actually Mercy Hospital, okay, where they've got the main hospital and then Mercy South, the clinic. But we've got some large industries. Our Parker Hannafin used to be a spoil and valve company. They're a large industry. And then we've got a number of other industries there. Actually, the Federal Reserve's got a place out in Washington, Missouri.
Really?
Storage. Yeah. I mean, we are a little more diverse than what everybody gives us credit for.
I was just going to bring up Washington, Missouri. So that's a good segue, because in some ways there seems like in Franklin County there's always been this power play between Washington, Missouri and Union, Missouri.
Yep.
Washington, a lot of people in St. Louis area have gone there. Great entertainment parts right there on the river, and it's relatively fast growing. I actually used to help run a antique store down there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and or booth rather. But so, how does that play out now?
Because it does seem like Franklin County is kind of a mixture between suburban and rural, and that often comes into play.
We're suburban, but honestly, there's still the rivalry between Washington and the other communities, particularly Union. I hate that. You know, I'm originally from St. Clair, and so I've lived in Washington since 1976, and I love it. I give my heart and soul and everything to Washington. It is the hub of Franklin County, the economic hub. And whether communities like it or not. But, you know, Union has done very, very well. Actually, Union's probably growing faster than Washington demographically and statistically. But Union's got East Central College, and they've got a lot of growth near Industrial Park. They've expanded their residential on the residential side, so they're doing very well. But Washington is growing, but at a much, I think, slower pace than Union is. But it seems like all the rest of the communities are they're barely growing. There is a little growth, but for the most part, it's pretty well flatlined.
So before we get into some of Franklin County's big issues and kind of your reflections on Missouri politics, tell us a little bit about yourself. I think from reading a news article from 2005, I got the sense that you kind of have humble origins economically. But you've also, as I mentioned on the outset, have been in public service for a very long time, starting at like the city councilman level all the way up to your point now. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, I got into my parents died at an early age. I was raised by my grandmother. And if you'd have told me when I was in high school that I'd be in politics, I'd called you a liar. I mean, this was never my game plan. But I got into, public service, running for the Washington City Council for the first time in '82, and actually I won by 4 votes.
4 votes.
4 votes.
Oh, okay. This is the power of every vote counts.
Yes, exactly right. And I am the example of that. I had, again, my first run at politics, I ran against 4 people. One was a hometown name, okay, and I'd only lived there for 5 years. My wife had been there forever, but I won in. I never looked back. I was on the city council for 6 years, and I was in car sales. I had sold automobiles for 25 years, but I'd gotten kind of down. I really felt I was a failure in life, and so then at that point I decided to run for full-time politics, and I ran for a spot on the Franklin County Commission, but as a district commissioner. So I won that race, and I served in Franklin County for 4 years, to which back then there were 2-year terms. Now they're 4-year. But then an opening came up. Our 20-year termed state representative, Wes Miller, he decided to retire, and I ran for state rep and won that seat.
Now this is before term limits, correct?
I came actually. This is
or
how lucky.
Right around the.
This is how lucky I am. I was elected when term limits got elected. So in '92, that's when term limits was gone. And actually, going back, the head of the term limits drive was Greg Upchurch of Franklin County. But I am not I can tell you I am not a fan of term limits.
Okay.
I mean,
we can
talk about that in a little bit. But, you know, you started off your career kind of in the minority because Republicans were not in control then. And then you eventually became a state senator in 2002 when they were in the majority.
Right.
You know, I covered the legislature, a year after Matt Blunt got elected. And I got the sense that a lot of, I would say, people who had been in the minority in the House and then were in the Senate were really motivated to get things done probably by how they were treated so poorly by the Democrats. Is that fair to say? It was not a fun time to be in the minority.
And that's why I have a problem with the legislature now. The Republicans don't have any idea what it was like to be in the minority. And, those of us that had been there and done that, realize, look, you've got to treat people a certain way. You've got to do things a certain way. And, the term limits, I think, has just killed the state, has ruined it. Again, in 92, the Republican Party was pushing term limits, and I said at that time, I'm against it. I was one of the few that stuck to my guns and said, this is, you have term limits at the ballot box. Just because a guy's doing a good job or a gal that all of a sudden we're going to knock her out and knock them out and go to somebody else, you don't do that in the private sector. Why are you doing it here? But anyway, it is what it is, and nobody has the wherewithal or the will to change it, to put it on the ballot. But I think it has hurt the legislature tremendously. But going back to your original question again, I wish those that serve in the legislature would remember what it's like to serve in a minority, because they would understand you can't do things the way sometimes they do it without consequences, and you got to remember what everybody went through back then, and that's the problem. There's no institutional memory anymore.
So you ended up being in the General Assembly, all told, including your House and Senate.
18 years.
18 years. That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything in particular that you recall as either a major achievement or something that you were glad that you were involved in, either to get something passed or to block it?
Oh gosh, well I didn't do a whole lot of blocking in the Senate. Obviously, in the House, when you're in the minority, you can't do much of anything. But I had some challenges. The emissions program that was initiated when I was in the House. The current emissions testing program in the St. Louis area, including Franklin County. I fought that tooth and nail.
You fought against that?
I fought against it. And the way that the department did it, for a while, they contracted with a contractor, and the way they set it up, where you could only go to 2 or 3 stations. Okay, back then it was terrible, and I sponsored the bill, and we passed it. Now that converted it back over and put it back in the mom and pop shops and repair facilities. That was one thing I did. But the biggest thing, I guess, that I was happy about, a couple things. I was chairman of the Senate Economic Development Committee and Local Government
Mm-hmm.
Committee for 6 years, and we got a lot done. We did a lot of not just tax credits, but special programs for different industries. I look at Monsanto, the expansion that they've done, and that was all part of what I had done. But locally, I specialized in my local Franklin County stuff, and there wasn't an Amtrak stop in Washington until I got there, and that's probably still is. It sounds kind of corny, but
no, it's not.
I'm proud of it. I am proud of it. There wasn't one, and I fought and got it there. And the other thing is, we now in the kind of the southern part of Franklin County have an enhanced enterprise zone. And that was one thing that I did in the Senate. And then when I got to the county, they hadn't done anything with it, so we were able to actually implement that. So that there's a new Menards distribution center in Sullivan that's going right now. That had it not been for the EEZ, it would not be there. So that's another thing that I'm proud of.
Before we transition into current issues, the article I was referring to earlier was on in 2005 when the Republicans ended up cutting Medicaid pretty substantially. And I remember you made a pretty impassioned speech talking about how difficult of a decision that was, because I believe you or your family were on Medicaid.
No, my family wasn't, but my grandmother, she wasn't on Medicaid, but she was all we had was Social Security.
Yeah, exactly.
And she raised me on Social Security with the death of my father. But
yeah, and my question was, that decision has stood for the last 12 years. There have been attempts to raise it back, but that decision the Senate and the House made back then is still the lay of the land. Was that one of the toughest decisions you ever made as a senator?
It was one of the toughest votes I ever had to make.
Yeah.
And because, with my upbringing, I grew up with people that had tough economic times. I can relate. It's hard for people to understand, but I can relate to those that don't have the the highest wages in that. But and that was why, especially with my grandmother and everybody else, I understood. I mean, what it was going to do, but it was a decision we had to make. The state was going broke, and I will tell you that after that vote, I caught hell from a lot of people. Excuse my French, I really did. That I caught more grief from people over that vote, and it was even from people that had great economic assets. I mean, those that were fairly wealthy, but they had compassion for those that didn't have that were on Medicaid. But then after that initial vote, then people started realizing for the next couple of 3 years that look, we had to do what we had to do, because as I said, it was unsustainable, and it still is. One thing that I wish. In a Mercy Hospital, I know has been advocating some kind of expansion.
Yeah, Medicaid expansion.
Medicaid expansion, and we can't go back to where we were, because there were a lot of abuses. But we also can't have everybody going to the emergency rooms either, because it's going to drain the hospitals and not pay them. That's the problem.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's the problem. So I don't know, and I get it. I mean, I understand we can't go back and do what we did, or and to try to expand it, but there has to be some way to help, at least to help the hospitals out. But going back, that was the toughest vote I ever had to make.
Well, have you heard? I mean, because it's kind of a segue a little bit, but as the presiding commissioner, have you been hearing from some of the nursing homes in Franklin County about whether or not they might be affected? If some of the like if the Senate bill were to pass in Congress, I mean, if Congress makes some of the Medicaid cuts, there's a lot of predictions that it's really going to affect nursing homes, because actually the highest percentage of spending on Medicaid is actually for low-income elderly in nursing homes.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you've heard much about that in Franklin County.
To be honest with you, I have not. Now, I do have a cousin that's right now in a nursing home, and I would have to suspect that she's probably on Medicaid, because they don't really have any income to speak of. But so I do have a concern there. But again, it's like a death spiral. I mean, I don't know where we're going, because at some point it's all of this is just unsustainable. I have compassion for those that don't have income to have a decent wage or decent family life. But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, because again, the state just can't keep the expansion of Medicaid and those programs up without some kind of major tax increase, I don't think, or revenue increase. And right now, as they look, the governor, as far as I know, he hasn't acted on the budget yet, from what I understand. And I mean, now they got apparently they got a $125 million shortfall. So.
Well, I'm transitioning more locally, and I think we'll circle back to state politics near the end. What are the big issues in Franklin County? I know I talked with you a few years ago about transportation being probably a particularly critical issue, just because some of the roads in Franklin County are narrow and pretty dangerous. But including that, what are some things that have been at top of mind for you as the presiding commissioner?
Well, obviously, transportation is our biggest issue. It really is. It's we need Highway 47 improved from St. Clair to Washington, and the money's not there. It's probably close to $80 million project that MoDOT doesn't have any funds for. But the other issue is, I guess, really is our growth. As you know, you either grow or you die.
Yeah.
As a governmental entity, and we've been growing, but we have not been growing at any type. We're not flatlined yet, but it's very, very slow, and it's bothersome to.
Why do you think
me.
that is?
The only thing I can figure out is the fact that you've got St. Charles County that's booming, but it's a short drive. It's a very short drive. For Franklin County, it's over a half hour, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where you're commuting from. I mean, it's a drive out there, and we don't have the services that like St. Clair St. Charles County has, or Jefferson County, but we don't have the taxes, the tax rates either. So I mean, the quality. I think we have a tremendous quality of life, but we just don't have all of the services yet that people want. But again, we got to have growth, and that's, I think, the biggest issue is economic development. And the EEZ, the Enhanced Enterprise Zone, has helped, but it still hasn't gotten us to the growth potential that we should be.
Now, have there I think 40 or 50 years ago, I think Franklin County used to have some small factories like everybody did.
Mm-hmm.
And what has replaced them, if anything? And is that part of the problem, is that there isn't enough of those mid-level, middle-class factory jobs? Or is there something else that you think, if it's more tourism, or what do you think is the key to improving the economic growth?
Well, obviously, the wages are one thing. We do have a fair number of large industries. In New Haven, for example, the little town of New Haven, they've got Hennages, which manufacture weather strips for the auto industry. And I know everybody is everybody's looking for good help. But you got to pay, the wage scale needs to be a little higher to keep those people, because obviously with St. Louis County, with St. Charles County, and to a lesser part Jefferson County, I mean, it's competitive out there, and we really need to obviously get the wage rates up a little bit to where we're competitive with the other part of the metro area.
I would imagine if your transportation infrastructure improved and it was easier to get to Franklin County to St. Louis, that might be an economic driver too.
Yes.
Is that fair to say? And I know from talking with you 3 years ago, you were a supporter of the sales tax increase for transportation. But since then, there really hasn't been any proposal for transportation.
No.
That has to be pretty frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I mean, you look at the needs that we have, and you look at just in Franklin County, but you look at the needs in the St. Louis area. I mean, really, I don't understand why the legislature doesn't at least put a initiative on the ballot and let the people decide. And it's frustrating, but I know for the most part, I think most of our legislative delegation is supportive. Not all of them are, but something's got to be done. We can't keep going like we're doing.
Now, what would you recommend? Would it be a sales tax, property tax, increasing the gas tax? I mean, increasing the tobacco? I mean, I'm just wondering, as you look at it, what do you think would be the best way to raise the money that the state needs? It's basically for the state's match for federal funds in many cases.
Right.
Just kind of your thoughts.
I know some advocate a gas tax. I think, personally, it ought to be a little bit of everything. And I mean a little bit of everything. I mean, obviously, maybe the majority needs to be on the gas tax. But as I say, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And I'm afraid, especially with the gas tax, to get the amount of revenue that we need, you're going to raise the gas tax pretty significantly, and I'm afraid it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt everybody, especially the low income households. So I think if you do, and again, this is me, but I think if you do a little bit and maybe a little the highest amount in the gas tax, but a little bit of sales tax and maybe some user fees, maybe that's the silver bullet that solves our problem.
Toll roads?
No, I'm not supportive of toll roads. And I know there's an initiative out there to knock that out. Well, they're not going anywhere. They haven't gone anywhere for years. And I think Warren County's in the middle of an initiative. Try to put it on a ballot. Come on, it's not going to happen.
It's
not
basically
gonna
to stop something that has no chance of passing.
Exactly.
But one of the other things that I think that some people, there are arguments for and against gas taxes, sales taxes, whatnot, but from what you told me a couple of years ago, this is a matter of public safety. A lot of your roads are pretty dangerous, and they need to be widened so, people aren't literally dying on them. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say. And, there was an initiative to pave the roads, but, the bridges especially, it's critical. The bridges, the safety of the bridges. I mean, it's scary when you think some of when you cross a bridge, is this going to hold up when you get to the other side? I mean, and and it's not just for the state government, the state highways. It's for the cities and the counties both. I mean, they all need additional. We all need additional revenue to make improvements, but it's not there.
Now, switching gears to drugs, because that's been a big issue in rural and suburban areas.
Oh, yeah.
That, well, kind of the meth and then the opioid addiction.
Yes.
I know from a while ago that meth was an enormous problem in Franklin County, and I'm wondering if it's still a problem or whether the opioid crisis has basically, cast down on Franklin County, or is it both, essentially?
Well, the meth, I think the meth crisis has subsided for the most part. There are still some meth producers out there, but for the most part, it's been tougher to get the pseudoephedrine.
Why? Oh, because of the laws.
Yes, and Franklin County does. We did implement that, the pseudoephedrine law, where you have to have a doctor's prescription to obtain that. Right now, we're in the same crisis mode as what everybody else is with the opioid. I mean, in Washington, they just had I think 3 overdoses just in the last couple of days. I mean, it's a serious situation, but I don't know. We're going on the monitoring program. I have grave doubts of whether that on the local side it works. It needs to come from the state.
Oh, so as far as having a state monitoring program, which died.
Yes.
I mean, I was one of the issues I was following in the General Assembly, and it did die like in that last week or two. It thought it might come up, but it didn't. We had Representative Holly Rader on, who is one of the main crafters of the key bill. Do you have any thoughts on what sort of, is there a way for the General Assembly to get past the roadblock in the Senate, which is generally about concerns over privacy? I mean, just kind of what are your thoughts as a veteran, former legislator, how to get that something passed?
Well, it's frustrating that one senator blocks the whole and gums up the whole works. It's very frustrating. And I at least going back on my memory bank when I served in the Senate, there's one way to fix that. Well, there's actually 2 ways. Nobody's going to want to do the one way, which is the previous question. So you know what they need to do? They need to trot the bill out, and they need to keep it out on the floor and let the senator collapse. I mean, that's what you do in a filibuster. If let him talk it to death, and then when he can't talk no more, he collapses on the floor and they pass the bill. I mean, that's when we did that. We did that one time with Jason Bartle, Matt Bartle, on a gubernatorial appointment, and he held the floor until
17 hours.
Yeah,
by himself.
But then finally his legs quivered and withered, and that was the end of it. And I know it sounds crude, but look, folks, I mean, you can't have one person, and that's what we got here. We got one person holding
It's Rob Schaaf, but I actually think that he has help now because there were some more conservative people that got elected last cycle, and I think that's the issue with it. Just if he sits down, another person stands up, and if you have 4 people filibustering, it's hard to break.
When you have 4, if there's just one, you can do it. But if you've got 3 or 4. Yeah, there's no way you can do that.
Well, why do you think that a statewide would be better than like a county by county? Because what you were referring to is St. Louis County started one, and a lot of other counties have joined in. I guess Franklin is one of them, or is thinking of doing that. Is that correct? First of all,
I don't think so. We are again the 3-member commission. I think my other two colleagues are not in favor of it. And I've had concerns because they really haven't. This has not been set up very long, and I want to make sure that all the kinks are out of this program before we do it. Let the testing be done, but then after that, if we're going to do it. But I don't think we've got in Franklin County. I don't think I've got the votes to pass it.
Well, and for our listeners, Missouri is the only state that does not have a statewide opioid monitoring program.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this that granularly, but where are people getting the opioids? Are they just getting them like over-the-counter prescriptions and they're abusing it? Or are they going to St. Louis City to get them? Like, where's this Scrooge coming from?
Well, what I have been told, it's the doctor's prescriptions.
Okay.
And I guess they're in some cases doctor shopping. I know one thing from my own pain. It is more difficult to get any type of pain medicine from a doctor. I mean, it is very difficult to get the opioids or any type of pain medicine from your family physician. So people are doing it.
Well, I mean, because there is this debate about. I mean, there's the concern about the crisis, as far, especially with young people and others who get these prescriptions or steal the drugs. Some say it's really because it's a reflection of the economic times, and that there aren't some decent jobs. I mean, that it becomes a spiral, kind of a depression thing. People start doing it because there's anything else to do.
Because if I'm not mistaken, opioids are basically like prescription drugs that are abusing, and a lot of times this leads to heroin abuse, which is kind of similar, but it continues.
Yeah, but sometimes, they just get, well, I mean, it's like OxyContin, some of the other, but on the other hand, you have people with serious illnesses or they're dying.
Right.
And frankly, I can speak from experience about this, where I had a relative who I thought they were shortchanging giving him the opioids that he needed to make himself comfortable. I mean, the man's dying. I mean, he's going to be, he's only got a week or so. So there seems to be some question about this. On the one hand, they want to make sure that they curb this, but on the other hand, there are people who legitimately need the drugs for pain management. Right,
and that's where the line is very, very gray, and again, there may be some doctors out there that are abusing it. I don't know that. I know that from my own physician that again they are very, very cautious and conservative when they prescribe painkillers and that, because they want to make sure that you're not obviously not dependent on it, but that again that you're not abusing it either. And believe me, the state and the feds are watching. I think the doctors more so than ever before. So it's not like they just got an open checkbook and they're just writing prescriptions left and right. Maybe there's some doctors out there, but for the most part, I think they're pretty well nailed down.
Shifting a little bit to state politics, but also mixing in your local expertise. I know that on Friday they're going to be coming out with a report about tax credits and tax incentives. The governor set up a commission that is studying a lot of economic tax breaks, like the historic preservation tax credit, the low-income tax credit, and maybe some of the tax credits that passed when you were chair of the Economic Development Committee. My assumption, I don't have the report in front of me, but since the governor has been critical of tax credits and tax incentives, and this commission is full of people who are also critical of those incentives, that it's probably going to recommend some pretty deep cuts in these incentive programs. As somebody who was heavily involved in some of these things, how do you see this going forward, and how would it affect a community like yours?
Well, I think it would affect all communities, especially those that are involved. Washington and Franklin County, especially Washington, is very involved in historic preservation. And the Downtown Washington organization, they won national awards for preservation of some of the older structures. And going back to when I served, on the historic preservation tax credit, that's obviously the biggest one, but it's also the one that you get the most bang out of the buck. 1 out of 4 of the dollars that go to that program goes back into the program and renovates old structures that wouldn't be renovated. But I think the problem is, as I recall, is the fact that you can go out several years and redeem these tax credits.
Oh, especially low income, it could be 10. My understanding, and also there could be some situations where they get a historic tax credit and they don't redeem it for 2 or 3 years. Some of them they redeem right away, though.
Right.
But continue.
But that's the problem, I think, is the fact that you can't budget for them, and that was a discussion we had in the Senate before. The fact that you can budget for so much, but then all of a sudden, several years out, all these tax credits are being redeemed, and then all of a sudden, you're in a really an economic mess or a budget bind. But There's got to, I know there's got to be some common ground there, but it looks like to me the deck is stacked, and I think the committee is they're gonna do what they can to do away with the tax credits, and it's going to kill economic development. It's especially, again, you look at St. Louis here, Kansas City. Oh my God, the older structures that have been brought back. The Chase Park plazas, all over the place. It's unbelievable. So as you know, and I'm not a big one for, we got to save this structure, and all that. I mean, there are some that I think need to be torn down. There's other need to be saved. But again, you look at this program. It has been very successful, and believe me, there's a lot of taxes that are being brought on these structures that would not be had it not been for that historic tax credit program.
The last time they reduced some of these programs was in 2009 when you were still in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know, because I assume there's going to be an attempt next year to even make further cuts to it.
Well, I think they're going to try to whack them all.
Yeah. How much pressure did you get as a senator to not cut those programs, and especially the historics, and especially the low-income housing tax credits?
I wouldn't say. Well, I wouldn't say I got a huge amount of pressure, but I did get a considerable amount of pressure from those that are involved in the process. And I remember when we took a tour of the different projects here in the St. Louis area and statewide that had been renovated through the historic tax credit program, the Continental Hotel here, and again Chase Park Plaza, a number of of structures that have been brought back. In Washington, I can show you several
in fact,
places.
that's what I was going to ask you. If Washington, Missouri, if developers there have been taking advantage of some of that.
Yes. Yeah, and we don't have as much, obviously, as they do in St. Louis or Kansas City, but we have several. The farmers market, that is huge, highly successful. We have one of the best farmers market in Washington in the state of Missouri. We really do. Very proud of it. It's a neat facility. But there again, you look at these structures that were slated for demolition, and they've been able to bring them back, and again, they're back on the tax rolls. It's how do you deny that? But again, I understand when you're in a financial bind, just like with Medicaid. You gotta look at these programs and say where have we got to make the cuts, and you got to. I think everybody has to equally share.
So looking a bit more broadly at your view on state politics, I remember pretty clearly in 2007, you mentioned the previous question, which is a maneuver that kills a filibuster. Mm-hmm. Happened a few times in 2006 and 2007, and that caused great acrimony between Republicans and Democrats. Then there wasn't a previous question used for like 7 or 8 years, and now they're doing it pretty regularly again. And I've talked with some people that were in the legislature back then who aren't anymore, who say, use this maneuver at your own peril because it's just going to create a more toxic atmosphere. The interesting thing is, kind of an aside, is that a lot of the senators now were in the House back in 2007, and they obviously saw what was going on, and now they're still using the previous question. I mean, using that as a jumping off point, do you think that, killing Democratic filibusters like that is going to come back to haunt Republicans based on what happened in 2007?
Well, I'm just going to tell you, as you know, I miss the legislature, okay, or at least some of the people. But quite honestly, I'm glad I'm not there now. I see what's happened. I see the discourse, especially in the Senate. It's really sad. Some of the things that have been said and done, it's really it's sad. I'm glad I'm not there. But yeah, there are times where you have to. If you can't get it passed the normal way, okay, if they're gonna be obstructionist, at some point you've got to put your foot down and say, you got to lead and say, I'm not going to let a small minority be obstructionist. But on the other hand, you got to try to work with that group, in which a lot of cases we did. and there were compromises that were made. It just seems like now nobody wants to, and that's the problem we have in government today in politics. Nobody wants to compromise. It's a bad word nowadays. Well, that's how you get things done. Hey, look, what can I do to help you to get this passed? And that's one thing that I miss in the Senate. Is I was able to do, as you know, probably I was able to do that a lot, and we were able to get some stuff passed. But it seems like now it's just cutthroat, and it's sad. Again, there has to be more in politics today. There has to be more give and take. If you're going to draw a line in the sand and say I'm not going to bend on this, you're not going to get anything done. And that's, people have to go back to trying to work together, both on the local, state, and national level. And we don't do that anymore. It's all my way or the highway, and that's just wrong.
Now, are there particular issues that you feel in Jeff City that affect Franklin County where you see where this stalemate, because of the toxic atmosphere is really hurting? I mean, is it economic, transportation, a lot of things?
It's a lot of things. But one thing, too, I don't want to just blame Republican versus Democrat. Right. There's Republicans and Republicans that don't get along. And that's sad, too, But there are some other issues. Well, the county, one big thing for the counties is 911 funding, cell phones. That issue's every year it comes up, and I hear this. Oh, we got a chance to pass it. Well, no, it always dies. It seems like they can get it through the House, but when it gets to the Senate, it's always late in the session. And again, there are a small group of senators that block it. Well, again, I don't advocate the use of the PQ, but doggone it. Again, I think you run a filibuster out. You do like they did in the old days, like when Mr. Smith goes to Washington. You basically make them carry out the filibuster and then get it passed.
Well, I got to ask this question because back when you were in the Senate, I do recall that Governor Matt Blunt did get criticized from time to time on issues. I know there were some social conservatives that didn't like his view on stem cells. There were people that didn't like the Mohila bill, which you can Google and read about. I'm not going to get into it. Right. But, I didn't really see him, personally attack legislators. I think he tried to stay out of that fray. You obviously see a different scenario now with Governor Eric Greitens actually, attacking specific legislators on issues.
Yeah, his nonprofit group
and him personally. During the pay raise situation, he actually called out Denny Hoskins and Paul Whelan by name. So, those are two different strategies. Matt Blunt was a one-term governor. He did face some consequences from the Republicans not supporting him on everything. Do you think that what the governor is doing with the legislature now it should be done, or do you think it might come back to hurt him in the end from your view?
I'm going to be very honest and frank, which I have been with you all. You have to work as a governor. You have to work with the legislature. And it's sad. It's sad that the governor hasn't learned that. When he ran, and I'm gonna admit to everybody here, I voted for him. Okay, my good friend Mike Gibbons. Okay, Mike's daughter works for Governor Greitens on the fundraising side. It still does, but I guess what bothers me. And I'm going to use the phrase, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. He's out there criticizing, those that have served for a number of years, and, he's the new guy in town. And I understand that, and I can appreciate that. But again, you have to work with the legislature. And he doesn't do that. And especially when you go out and criticize, and somebody's doing something wrong, I understand that. Okay, I've been there, done that. It's not a good thing, but again, you can't say, oh, there are crooked politicians over here, and then over here saying, oh no, I'm doing this and it's okay with that. Well, no, it's like, and I'm gonna give you something here. All this about ethics reform and how the gifts and all that. I'm sorry, it is ridiculous. To think that a dinner can buy a legislator is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I know there's some that abuse it with all the tickets and all that. If they put a cap on it, that's one thing. But going to dinner, again, going back to this trying to the compromise bit, you got to socialize with legislators on both sides of the aisle. You can't just live in a cocoon and go out here and pass your legislation. You can't do that. You gotta work with people. You gotta socialize and get to know them. That's how I got stuff done, and it worked for me. You can criticize me however you want. That's fine. But you know what? I was able to get stuff passed and work compromises. But nobody does that. And in this case with the governor, I know there's people that have told him, look, you got to work with the legislature. But I don't think he sees it that way.
Well, we'll see how successful it is because, it may end up being something that the public likes because they don't like legislators right now, but we don't know that for a couple years at this point.
I mean, I'm assuming that some of your comments have to do with his nonprofit group where he can set up and he can take unlimited amounts from unknown donors. So we have no idea who is giving money to this group. We see a little evidence of how it's spent because it's been spent to attack some fellow Republicans. Senator Schaaf is among those who is calling for disclosure of these groups if they're active in Missouri politics. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because this is a phenomenon that really wasn't around that much when you were in the General Assembly, unless I'm wrong. No, but I'm just interested in your take on that. And does that feed into this issue of whether or not he gets along with legislators?
Well, again, and I forgot the phrase, but, he criticizes the career politicians. I'm one. I guess I'm one. Obviously, I've been next year when I retire, it'll be 36 years in public office of some kind. But again, you can't just come on the scene and all of a sudden the career politicians, they're no good and all that. Hey, wait a minute. You serve in local government and you've been where I've been and had to make the tough decisions that I've had to make. I mean, then if you walked in my shoes, then you understand where I'm coming from. But just to put a blanket name on a career politician, well, you're a career politician and you're no good. I mean, it's ridiculous. And again, going back to this issue of the special thing, again, he's saying how bad the corruption is in Jeff City. You got some, put it this way, there's none of us without sin. Okay? So you got some people that have made mistakes. I'm going to tell you something, though. I'll say it this way. I don't think that he should judge with this other nonprofit that he's got. Again, it's all part of perception. And if he wants to be, and again, I'm trying not to criticize him, but again, if you're trying to perceive that you're the best thing that came around since sliced bread, and that you're clean and all that, you can't be criticizing everybody over here when you've got something that's maybe kind of questionable here. You need to disclose it and move on. And that's where I think is really the biggest mistake. He should go ahead and disclose who the donors are and move on to something else. But again, unfortunately, he's not doing that. And I think it's perception. And again, he's criticizing out of both sides, and that's not right.
So before we end the show, I just heard you're not going to be running for re-election next year?
No, sir. I'm retiring.
You're retiring. Are you going to go to Branson, or what are you going to do next?
No, I got. I'm on a couple other boards that I won't like Oates Transportation. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm on the Oates board out of Columbia, and I'm on the Missouri Main Street Connection board. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do some volunteer work. I'm active in our Lions Club, former president, and so I want to stay active but it's time for me to. You're probably surprised at some of the comments that I made, but it's time for me to retire. But you see some of the new people that come on. If they would work up through the local government like I have and served, I think you get a different perspective on politics.
Will you be endorsing Brock Olivo like you did for Congress to replace
I
for
haven't
presiding
talked to
commissioner.
him since then. I have not seen him since then.
He is now the special teams coach of the Denver Broncos.
Is he really?
I think he'd make a fabulous presiding commissioner.
So is your key message here is that being a career politician, if it shows you have a lot of experience, isn't necessarily bad?
No, it's not bad. It's how you serve the people, and that's with anybody. I say if you serve like I have with your heart and soul, and you try to do the right thing. And look, we all make mistakes. I'm not perfect, but one thing I've learned a long time ago, I'll admit my mistakes. If we screw up, and we do all the time, I'll come forward and admit it, and we move on. It's when you try to hide your mistakes is when you get in trouble. But again, I think it's better when you serve in some capacity and then you move up the line, because you see how it's done. If you start out on the high end, you don't realize how things operate on a local level, and I think that's the most important. But unfortunately, obviously there's going to be some that disagree with me on that, but it's worked for me, and I'm very proud of my career.
For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
JMannies. That's JMannies.
You're not on Twitter, are you?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't do Twitter or Facebook.
just call him on his phone.
Yes.
Franklin County. I don't know what it is.
Was it Franklin County Courthouse? Is that the best
yeah,
way to
well,
get
here,
you? What's the number?
I'm one of the few. I'll even give you my cell phone number: 314-650-5777. That's my personal cell phone. So the county doesn't pay for my cell phone.
Call him on his cell phone. We'll talk to you all later. Until then, so long.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.